The hesitation lasted exactly 2 seconds. Dr. Mercer watched from the medication cart as Hannah Clarke's fingers froze above the 4 line, her eyes flicking to the pharmacy label, then back to the patient chart, then to the saline bag. 2 seconds. That was all he needed. He made a note on his tablet, 9:13 a.m., potential medication error averted by supervision, and filed it away with the others. Hannah felt his stare like weight pressing against her back. She didn't turn. She selected the correct for gauge, attached the tubing with movements so precise they required no conscious thought, and started the line in the patient's forearm with one smooth puncture. Sinus rhythm on the monitor. Clean insertion. The elderly woman's relief was immediate. "Thank you, dear," the patient whispered. Hannah nodded and moved to the next room without acknowledging Mercer's presence. This was the pattern now. 18 months at Cedar Creek Medical in Savannah, and every shift followed the same choreography: work flawlessly, accept scrutiny and silence, disappear into the background like antiseptic evaporating from skin. The shift briefing started at 7 a.m. in the cramped conference room on the 3rd floor. 8 nurses, 3 residents, Mercer standing at the head of the table with a folder that looked thicker than it had yesterday. Hannah sat in the back corner, hands folded on the laminate surface, listening to bed assignments cycle through names and numbers. Room 202, post-op appendectomy. Room 209, congestive heart failure. Room 218, acute trauma, construction accident, spinal precautions. When Mercer got to 218, something in her chest tightened. She kept her expression neutral, but her fingers pressed into her palms hard enough to leave crescents. Construction worker, Mercer continued, consulting his notes. Marcus Webb, age 34, fell from scaffolding, multiple contusions, possible spinal fracture. He's stable but he'll need careful monitoring. I'll be checking on him regularly. The way he said it made it clear, not because he was worried about the patient's condition, but because he wanted to ensure the nursing staff didn't miss anything. As if competence was something they'd have to prove to him. Hannah's jaw moved. Just one small flex. Mercer's eyes found hers across the table. She met his gaze for 1 second, then looked back down at her assignment sheet. The room shifted slightly. No one else noticed. But she did. After briefing, she pulled on her badge, the cheap laminate one that listed her as Hannah Clarke, RN, 2 years service, and walked through the fluorescent corridors of Cedar Creek toward the patient rooms. The lights hummed their eternal mechanical drone, interrupted by the occasional code blue announcement, the wheeze of ventilators, the hydraulic hiss of bed adjustments. These sounds were the heartbeat of the hospital, and Hannah's own breathing had synchronized with them months ago. The unit patch was still there, pressed against her ribs. She could feel it through the fabric of her scrubs, a small rectangle of faded green and black, the emblem of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, the unit she'd carried for 12 years. 3 tours. 1 silver star that officially didn't exist. It was sewn into the lining of her jacket, hidden beneath layers of polyester, and 3 years of enforced civilian life. Sometimes, during the quiet moments between patients, she'd place her hand over her left breast and feel it there, proof that Captain Hannah Clarke had existed, even if the woman wearing the badge had to forget. Her hands moved through the shift with the automatic precision of someone who'd spent more time in field medicine tents than she'd spent anywhere else. Room 201, diabetic with a respiratory infection. For line started, blood draw for labs, medications charted. Room 205, post-operative gynecology patient with pain scores climbing. Hannah was already reaching for the pain management medication before the call light even flickered, the kind of anticipatory care that came from years of watching patients before they crashed. Room 210, elderly man recovering from hip replacement, vital signs stable, dressing dry. No hesitation. No tremor. Just the muscle memory of hands that had started fours in the dark, field medicine tents in Kandahar province where the electricity came from generators and the sterile supplies were whatever you could scavenge. She'd sutured wounds by flashlight. She'd pushed epinephrine into the carotid artery of a man she loved, watching his pupil dilate as his heart seized and restarted. That was the job. You saved the ones you could, and you moved on to the next casualty. Room 218 was at the end of the corridor, the late afternoon sun throwing geometric shadows across the doorway. Marcus Webb lay in the hospital bed with his right leg elevated, his left arm bandaged from wrist to elbow. His chart said construction worker, age 34, admitted after a 3-story fall. Multiple contusions, fractured tibia, possible L for compression fracture. The doctors were monitoring for spinal cord involvement. What the chart didn't say was that he was built like someone who'd spent his civilian life moving lumber and rebar, muscles worn lean from work. What it didn't say was that he had tattoos covering 90% of his visible skin. Hannah's breath came in through her nose, out through her mouth. This was not the time to feel anything. She moved to the bedside, checking his vitals with the same efficiency she'd perfected over 1,000 other patients. Blood pressure stable. Heart rate steady. Oxygen saturation 96%. Everything nominal. Everything controlled. Then he looked at her. His eyes were a color she'd last seen by moonlight, moving through the rubble of a half-demolished compound in Kandahar. His face was different, older, marked by 3 years of life lived outside the uniform, sun-worn and rougher, but there was something in the set of his jaw that made her hand still for just a fraction of a second. Not enough for him to notice. Not enough for the cameras to catch it. She avoided his gaze and turned her attention to his foresight. The bag was running clear. The line was patent. Everything fine. Everything normal. Everything professional. "You're a new nurse," he said. His voice was rougher now, hoarse from the anesthesia, but the cadence was the same. That particular way of speaking that came from command training, even if he wasn't wearing the uniform anymore. "Been here 18 months, Hannah replied, keeping her tone neutral. It wasn't a lie. Just a different truth. He studied her face like he was trying to solve a mathematical problem. His left hand moved, lifting off the mattress, and for a moment Hannah thought he might reach toward the unit patch he couldn't see. Instead, he turned his arm to face upward, showing the tattoos that covered his forearm. Hannah saw it and didn't see it. Saw the name in precise black ink and forced her eyes to move past it like it was just another detail in the room. Like she hadn't carried that call sign through smoke and dust and the screams of men dying in her arms. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice uncertain. "Do I know you?" "Your face." "I?" He trailed off, his eyes continuing to search her features. "Never mind. It's the medication. They said I'd be confused for a while." "Happens all the time," Hannah said. She adjusted his for flow rate, not because it needed adjusting, but because her hands needed something to do. "Rest. Your body needs recovery time." She was already turning away when he spoke again. His voice had shifted into something more formal, like someone calling on a name they almost remembered but couldn't quite find in their memory. "Thank you," he said. She paused. Every muscle in her body went still. The kind of still that comes from discipline, from hundreds of hours of training in how to control the physical manifestations of stress. She could feel her heartbeat in her temples, in the hollow of her throat. "You're welcome," she said without turning back. "I'll check on you in an hour." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when she stepped into the hallway and saw Dr. Mercer standing outside room 215, tablet in his hands, watching her exit from 218. He'd been there the whole time, silently documenting. His eyes moved from Hannah's face to the door she'd just closed, and then back to his notes. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. The smile of a man building a file, piece by piece. Hannah walked past him without acknowledgement and headed toward the medication station at the far end of the corridor. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. Her face was blank as hospital-issue linoleum. But the unit patch against her ribs felt suddenly heavier, like it was burning through the fabric of her scrubs, announcing to anyone who cared to listen that there was more to Hannah Clarke than her personnel file suggested. That somewhere under the deferential posture and the soft voice and the willingness to accept blame for problems that weren't hers, there lived someone else entirely. Someone who'd seen the worst version of human beings and had chosen to save them anyway. Someone who'd been buried alive for 3 years and was beginning to remember what it felt like to breathe. Mercer turned another page on his tablet and began typing. Whatever he was documenting, whatever he was building toward, Hannah knew with the absolute certainty of combat experience that it wasn't over. The hesitations he was cataloguing. The brief pause when she saw Marcus Webb's face. All of it was being filed away, organized into a narrative that led toward a single, inevitable conclusion. She just didn't know it yet, but that conclusion was going to change everything. Thursday morning hit Cedar Creek Medical like most Thursday mornings, fluorescent lights humming their monotonous prayer, the smell of antiseptic cutting through coffee breath, residents clustered like med students always do. Grand rounds. Hannah Clarke stood at the back of the group as Dr. Mercer held her patient chart up like it was contaminated. His voice had that particular edge it got when he was performing for an audience. "This is what happens," he announced, turning the chart so everyone could see her documentation, "when we lower our hiring standards to fill shifts." The words landed soft but landed hard. The residents snickered, that nervous laughter that fills the spaces where people don't yet know how to think for themselves. Hannah felt her jaw clench. Just once. A single muscle movement, barely visible, but it was there. The only betrayal of anything beneath her surface. Her hand stayed steady at her sides. Her face remained what it always was, professional. Neutral. A mask sewn so tight you couldn't slip a scalpel between it and her skull. "Notice the lack of medical terminology sophistication," Mercer continued, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, "all power, no speed. Clarke here thinks patient presents with respiratory distress is adequate assessment. In a teaching hospital, we expect more." He looked directly at her, holding her eyes for just long enough to make sure the humiliation landed. "Don't we, Nurse Clarke?" "Yes, doctor," she said. Quiet. Deferential. The word of a woman who knew her place. He handed the chart back to her. His fingers released it like he was dropping something contaminated. She accepted it without reaction, continued her rounds as if he'd commented on the weather. As if the temperature had simply changed and that was all there was to it. 2 hours later, the vending machine in the staff lounge hummed its mechanical song. Hannah reached for a coffee, her hand steady on the selection button, when she heard Mercer's voice from around the corner. Not loud. Never loud. That was how you knew he was truly dangerous, when he didn't need volume to land his strikes. "Nurses like Clarke," he was saying to Dr. Patricia Yates, the surgical chief, his tone conversational in the way that sharks are conversational when they smell blood, "are why our patient outcomes suffer. 3.4% infection rate increase since January. You know why." Hannah's hand froze on the coffee cup. Not a tremor. Just a pause. A second of processing. "Because we have people on our floors," Mercer continued, "who have no business being here. I've looked into Clarke's background. Military experience, she claims. There's no record of it beyond basic nursing school. It's fabricated resume padding. Classic resume inflation from someone who knows they can't compete on actual credentials. I'm building a file. Going to justify her termination before she kills someone." The coffee machine dispensed with a mechanical hiss. Hannah stood there, hand still extended, listening to the rest of it. "She makes mistakes," Yates said, cautious. "But I haven't seen." "You will," Mercer said. "Once I'm done documenting, you will. I've already started flagging her charting inconsistencies, pulling case reviews. This is about patient safety. This is about standards." Hannah took her coffee. The cup was warm in her hands, real, present, something to hold on to. She turned and walked back toward the nurse's station, her limp slightly more pronounced than usual. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just the physical manifestation of a woman carrying something too heavy to hide. That afternoon, during routine medication distribution on the 4th floor, Mercer intercepted her in the hallway. He had 2 residents with him. Teaching moments. Leverage points. An audience. "Nurse Clarke," he said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear, loud enough for patients to look out of their rooms wondering what the commotion was. Or should I say nurse inadequate? Perhaps you could explain to these fine medical students why you charted this patient's pain management without consulting the attending physician. Or is independent thinking beyond your skill set? Hannah met his eyes. Zero expression. The kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. She took the chart from his hands, not snatched it, just took it, her movements precise and unhurried. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady as a surgical laser. Standing orders were followed. "Doctor." She walked away as he laughed with the residents. The sound followed her down the corridor like smoke. In room 218, Marcus Webb watched this interaction from his hospital bed, his door open just enough to see the hallway. Something stirred in the fog of his memory. Not a clear image. Not yet. Just a sensation. A woman's voice cutting through chaos, steady and unshakable, saying something he couldn't quite remember but could absolutely feel. His hand moved to his right forearm, to the tattoo he'd gotten 3 years ago during recovery, the letters faded now from time and sun but still readable, Sanctuary. He couldn't remember why he'd gotten it. Couldn't remember her face clearly. But his body remembered. His body always remembered. The night shift began at 7 o'clock. Hannah noticed immediately that staffing was thinner than usual. Mercer had recently taken over scheduling rotations. She didn't have proof of deliberate thinning, but she'd worked medical long enough to recognize patterns. You didn't need a formal investigation to see the architecture of sabotage. It was written in the staff board like a blueprint. The on-call surgeon tonight was Dr. Rodriguez, notoriously slow to respond and currently, Hannah learned from the admin desk, at a dinner party downtown. 22 minutes from Cedar Creek Medical. Maybe 20 if the traffic on Victory Drive was light. The night moved like most nights moved in a hospital, controlled chaos broken by moments of nothing, punctuated by moments of everything. Hannah worked her floor with the efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that hesitation cost lives. Room 304 was a retired Marine named Thomas Brennan, 73 years old, recovering from a routine gastrointestinal surgery. Routine surgery with a routine recovery. Until 9:51 p.m. The monitors started screaming. Not alarm tones, actual screams, the acoustic equivalent of someone's body shutting down. Hannah moved before the first alert cleared the speakers. She was through the door in seconds, assessing in the way that only people who've worked emergency medicine or combat triage can assess, the entire picture in one glance. Cardiac tamponade. Fluid compressing his heart. His vitals were dropping like a stone in dark water, and he had maybe 3 minutes before the pressure stopped the organ entirely. She could see it in his color, hear it in his breathing, feel it in the clinical knowledge that lived in her hands. The first-year resident, Dr. Amy Chen, materialized in the doorway, phone already in hand, frozen in the particular way young doctors froze when their training met reality and reality was winning. "Call Rodriguez," Hannah ordered. Not a request. A command. Tell him cardiac tamponade, patient coding, code blue status. But she was already moving. Not waiting for confirmation. She knew Rodriguez wouldn't make it in time. She'd seen this exact scenario before, Kandahar, outside the FOB in a field hospital that was more tent than structure, less equipment than prayer. She'd performed this procedure with less training and more chaos, with a combat knife instead of proper surgical instruments, on soldiers who didn't have the luxury of waiting for proper care. But this was Cedar Creek Medical in Savannah, Georgia. This was an American hospital with protocols and hierarchies and very specific laws about who was authorized to do what. She looked at Brennan's blue-tinged lips. Heard his labored breathing. Felt the weight of 3 years of hiding, of playing small, of accepting humiliation from a man who had no idea what he was talking to. She made the choice. From the crash cart, she took a scalpel. The handle was plastic and warm. The blade was precise and cold. She made the incision with the kind of certainty that only muscle memory provides, the second intercostal space, midclavicular line, the anatomy as familiar as breathing. Dr. Chen's voice was shrill. "You can't, you're not." Hannah's hands were already moving. For years of military training, 3 tours of duty, hundreds of lives saved in the dark. The tension released. The pressure relieved. Brennan's vitals began climbing almost immediately. Oxygen saturation climbing, 71, 78, 84, 89. His heart found its rhythm. Sinus rhythm. Steady. Strong. She was closing when Mercer arrived. He'd been in the building, reviewing charts in his office. He stood in the doorway taking in the scene, Hannah with bloody gloves, the open chest cavity, the resident's pale face, the patient breathing easier than he had been 5 minutes ago. "What?" Mercer said with deadly quiet, each word a separate sentence. "Have you done?" Hannah stripped off her gloves, her face betraying nothing. The mask didn't crack. The voice didn't waver. Just the pure, flat statement of someone reporting facts. Relieved a cardiac tamponade. Patient is stable. Mercer's smile was serpentine. A smile that had won him social battles for 30 years. A smile that had no idea what was coming. "You just ended your career," he said. Hannah met his eyes. She didn't blink. She didn't tremble. She didn't defend herself or explain her actions or recite protocols. She simply said, "He's alive," and walked past him into the hallway, leaving him standing in the doorway of room 304 with a patient he'd been willing to let die, and a file he'd been building, and an understanding that was only just beginning to dawn. He had no idea who he was standing next to. The night shift at Cedar Creek Medical began at 7 o'clock, and Hannah Clarke noticed the absence before she noticed anything else. The third-floor nursing station was a skeleton crew, 2 RNs for 23 patients, 1 CNA, no float support. On a Thursday night in March, with admissions running high, this wasn't staffing. It was sabotage. She didn't need to pull the scheduling software to know Dr. Mercer's hand was in this. She'd watched him work for 6 weeks now, learning the rhythm of his escalation. The public humiliation at Grand Rounds had been Act 2. This was Act 3, the strategic suffocation, the slow removal of her ability to function. Hannah changed into her scrubs in the locker room, hands moving with practiced efficiency. She opened her jacket to secure it in her locker, and the faded unit patch sewn inside the lining caught against the metal. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, a dark horse. Her hand stilled for a moment, fingers brushing the embroidered insignia. She'd had it sewn in before she disappeared into Cedar Creek Medical. A talisman. A reminder of who she actually was. Then she closed the door and locked it, becoming the nurse again, the one with no past, the one with nothing to lose. The charge nurse, Patricia, handed her the assignment with an apologetic grimace. For new admits, 3 post-op, 2 end-of-life. One of them's the construction site fall from last week, Marcus Webb, room 218. Still confused about what happened. He's stable now, but they want neuro checks every 2 hours. Patricia lowered her voice. Mercer put in a note that he wants all his procedures documented to the minute. He's watching us. Hannah took the assignment without comment. On-call surgeon. Dr. Patterson. He's at his daughter's soccer game in Jacksonville. ETA 20 minutes if we need him. Patricia's jaw tightened. Which means if something goes sideways, we've got a problem. Especially with him. She glanced toward Mercer's office, where the figure sat at his desk, reviewing files. 20 minutes. Hannah filed that number away like ammunition. She'd learned to think in timelines the way other people thought in moments. 20 minutes to surgical intervention. 3 minutes until cardiac arrest from untreated cardiac tamponade. The math was simple. In a real crisis, the margins were thin enough to cut. The night settled into its rhythm, medication passes, vital sign checks, the soft beeping of monitors that formed the white noise of Cedar Creek's 3rd floor. Hannah moved through her rounds with the mechanical precision that had kept her alive in Kandahar, the same precision that had earned her the call sign Sanctuary. You stay focused. You stay present. You don't anticipate what might come. But you're ready when it does. Room 304 was the first warning. Colonel James Hartley, retired Marine, admitted for post-operative monitoring after a hip replacement. 74 years old, strong as a pine tree, with the kind of presence that made younger men straighten their spines. Hannah took his vitals at 8:15. Blood pressure 138/82. Heart rate 88. O2 sat 97 on room air. Normal. Textbook post-op stable. She checked on him again at 9:40. He was restless, not the agitation of pain, but the fidgeting of someone uncomfortable in his own skin. His BP had crept up to 142/86. Heart rate 92. Still normal parameters, but moving in the wrong direction. The fluorescent lights hummed their constant mechanical song overhead as she adjusted his blanket. "How's the pain, Colonel?" "Manageable," he said, his voice like gravel in an empty warehouse. "Just feel like I can't get comfortable. Shoulders tight. Shoulder tension. Post-op anxiety, probably. A symptom of nothing, or the first whisper of something." In 6 weeks at Cedar Creek, Hannah had learned that hospitals ran on the assumption that most vital sign changes meant nothing. They were usually right. The problem was the times they were wrong. Those were the times people died. By 10:30, she checked him again. BP 144/88. Heart rate 96. Temperature 98.6, stable. She listened to his lungs, clear bilaterally. Heart sounds normal, no murmurs. She was about to leave when he shifted in bed and winced, his hand moving to his chest. "Sharp pain?" she asked. "Not sharp. Pressure. Like someone sitting on my ribs." He looked at her with the directness of a man who'd spent his life reading situations. "That's not normal, is it?" Hannah kept her face level. "Pressure in the chest. Post-op. Recent surgery." The differential was long, anxiety, muscle strain, inflammatory response to the trauma of surgery itself. But it was also longer if you included the things that could kill you in 8 minutes. Cardiac tamponade. Pulmonary embolism. Tension pneumothorax, though that would have presented immediately post-op. "I'm going to check your surgical site," she said. She lifted his gown, examined the hip incision. Dry. No drainage. No erythema. No swelling beyond what was normal for 6 days post-op. She replaced the gown and her hands were steady, her voice level. "I'm going to get you some pain medication and call your surgeon. We're going to take good care of you." She didn't tell him that Patterson was 20 minutes out. She didn't tell him that the night shift was running on fumes. She didn't tell him that if something was actually happening, they were operating on borrowed time. She simply said, "I'll be right back." The nursing station was empty, Patricia was in room 310 with a patient on the phone, and the CNA was restocking supplies. Hannah reached for the phone to call Patterson when she caught sight of Dr. Mercer in his office. He was on his phone, his jaw moving in emphatic speech, one hand gesturing like he was explaining something to someone who refused to understand. She watched him for 3 seconds, long enough to see him point at documents on his desk, long enough to see his expression shift into something satisfied. He was making calls. Building his file. Documenting her toward obsolescence. Hannah dialed Patterson's number. The surgeon answered on the second ring, the sound of a crowd in the background, someone calling out a score. "Patterson, it's Hannah Clarke at Cedar Creek. Colonel Hartley in 304, post-op hip replacement. He's presenting with chest pressure, some shoulder tension. BP's climbing, heart rate's trending up. Probably nothing, but post-op day 6. Patterson's voice had already shifted into clinical mode, the soccer game forgotten. Could be anxiety. Could be minor PE. Could be 100 things. Any shortness of breath? He didn't mention any. Okay. Keep a close eye on him. I'm about 15 minutes out. If he gets worse, if his O2 starts dropping, if he can't breathe, you call 911 and get him to the closest surgical facility. Don't wait for me. 15 minutes. Not 20. Still an eternity if you measured it in cardiac rhythms. Understood, Hannah said. By 11 o'clock, Colonel Hartley's blood pressure was 148/90. Heart rate 104. Still in normal post-op range, technically, but she'd learned to read the trajectory, not the number. The vital signs were a story, and this story was moving toward a climax. She checked his O2 saturation, still 97%. Lungs still clear. But he was breathing a little faster now, 22 respirations per minute instead of 16. She was documenting his vitals when the call button in room 304 lit up. A soft chime. Probably nothing. Probably just the colonel asking for ice water or another blanket. She was wrong. When she stepped into his room, Colonel Hartley's face had gone grey. His hand was pressed to his sternum, and his breathing had taken on the quality of a man trying to suck air through a coffee filter. Can't breathe right, he gasped. Pressure's worse. Can't, his words cut off as he struggled to inhale. Hannah moved to the bedside. I'm here. I've got you. She reached for the blood pressure cuff, her hands moved without conscious thought, muscle memory from 3 tours of duty in Kandahar, from 1,000 moments of staying calm when everything was becoming a disaster. BP 156/98. Heart rate 124. O2 sat dropping, 95 now, falling toward 93. The fluorescent lights above seemed to buzz louder, or maybe that was her own heartbeat accelerating. But that wasn't the worst part. His neck veins were distended. The small blue tributaries that mapped the landscape of his neck were swollen like river channels after a flood. And his heart sounds, when she listened with her stethoscope all muffled. Distant. Like they were coming from underwater. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardial sac around his heart, compressing the chambers, suffocating his cardiac output 1 beat at a time. In a hospital without immediate surgical intervention, this was a death sentence written in 8 minutes or less. Hannah picked up the room phone with her other hand and pressed the code blue button, not waiting for anyone to answer. The overhead intercom crackled to life, and her voice came out steady, level, controlled. Code blue, room 304. Cardiac emergency. All hands to 304. Then she turned back to Colonel Hartley, whose eyes were wide with the knowledge that something fundamental had changed. His oxygen sat was 88 now. His heart rate was 138. His blood pressure was collapsing, 152/96 becoming 148/94, numbers dropping like a countdown timer toward the moment his heart would simply stop. 20 minutes to surgical intervention. 3 minutes until cardiac arrest. Hannah's hands were already moving. The scalpel came from the crash cart. Not surgical steel from the OR, not the thin precise blade meant for delicate incisions, but the thick utilitarian knife used for cutting through clothing and obstacles when seconds meant the difference between recovery and death. Hannah's hands moved before conscious thought caught up, muscle memory that didn't care about protocol or hierarchy or the fact that Dr. Mercer wasn't on the floor. Colonel Hartley's chest was caved inward, his breathing a wet rasp, and the echocardiogram that should have been routine 3 minutes ago showed what everyone in the room already felt: no cardiac output. Tamponade. Pressure. 3 minutes until arrest. The resident froze. Nurses scrambled. Hannah didn't ask. Didn't request permission. Didn't wait for anyone to tell her what to do. She prepped the left anterolateral thoracotomy site with antiseptic that smelled like copper and industrial alcohol. The blade bit through skin and muscle and ribs with a sound like breaking celery, and the room went from chaos to something worse: silent shock. A second-year surgical resident watched a trauma nurse crack a patient's chest like it was the most natural thing in the world, her jaw set, her breathing controlled, her hand steady as surgical lasers. No hesitation. No trembling. Just the fluid precision of someone who had done this before in places where there wasn't time to fill out incident reports or wait for chain of command. The ribs separated. The pericardium gleamed dark and distended. Hannah's gloved fingers found the membrane and felt rather than saw the tension beneath, the backup of blood that had nowhere to go, the pressure crushing the heart like a fist. She opened the pericardium with the same knife, felt the sudden release of tension, felt the room's air pressure change as 300 milliliters of blood escaped into the chest cavity and the heart began to beat again. The monitor's flat line became a heartbeat. Faint. Then stronger. Oxygen saturation climbing from 72 to 81 to 89. Blood pressure registering for the first time in 5 minutes. Sinus rhythm, someone whispered. Hannah didn't look up. Her hands moved on their own, managing the bleeding, checking for the other injuries that caused the tamponade in the first place, working methodically while the resident still hadn't moved. Colonel Hartley's color was returning. His pupils responsive. His oxygen sat hitting 94% and staying there. She had maybe 40 seconds before Dr. Mercer arrived. She could already hear boots moving through the hallway with purpose, fast, like someone had called a code that shouldn't have been called, had initiated a procedure that should never have been performed without surgical oversight. The door burst open. Dr. Mercer's presence filled the room like a sudden pressure change, his eyes moving from the patient to the open chest to Hannah's bloody gloved hands in one smooth assessment. His face went through 3 expressions in sequence: disbelief, anger, and something colder, the look of a man watching his plan crystallize. "Step back," he said. Not a request. A command delivered in the flat tone of someone accustomed to obedience. Hannah stepped back. She had done what needed doing. The patient was stable. The crisis was resolved. Mercer was a cardiovascular surgeon and the patient's assigned physician, and the hierarchy reasserted itself like water finding its level after a stone stopped disrupting it. He took her place at the chest, inspected the pericardiotomy, examined the bleeding vessels. His movements were technically competent but 18 seconds slower than Hannah's had been, and everyone in the room knew it. "Get me surgical packs. Now," he ordered. Then, to Hannah, without turning around, "You're done here." She left. Peeled off her gloves in the hallway. Washed her hands at the sink outside Hartley's room. The adrenaline was draining from her bloodstream already, the field medicine calm giving way to the cold understanding of what she'd just done, violated the surgical chain of command, performed an emergency thoracotomy without attendant supervision, and done it in a way that made every physician in the room understand that she knew more about damage control than they did. 30 seconds later, Dr. Mercer called his first phone call. Hannah was still in her scrubs, still within earshot of the nursing station, when she heard him in his office, voice clipped and precise. "To administration, I need to formally document a critical patient safety concern. A nurse performed an unsupervised thoracotomy this evening. I have 6 witnesses. I'm filing a formal complaint." Pause. "I understand. Thank you." Click. The second call came while she was updating Hartley's chart. "To the State Medical Board, I need to report a potential credential issue. A staff nurse at Cedar Creek Medical is claiming military medical training that I cannot verify. She performed a surgical procedure tonight that should require licensing oversight. I'm concerned about patient safety implications." Pause. "Yes, I can submit documentation. Thank you." The third call was faster. "To the hospital's legal team, I'm initiating a formal incident report on negligent patient care. I need legal guidance on liability exposure." Pause. "Within the hour would be appropriate." The fourth call made Hannah's hands go still. To someone at the State Licensing Bureau, she heard Mercer give a name that meant something in that world, pull on a relationship that had depth and history. "I'm calling about a nurse at Cedar Creek Medical in Savannah. Hannah Clarke. I'm concerned her credentials may not be legitimate. I'm requesting an expedited review." "Yes, I understand the process. But I'm concerned this could be part of a pattern." For phone calls. 47 minutes. For different systems activated simultaneously, all of them moving toward the same conclusion, Hannah Clarke was a liability, her credibility was fabricated, and her presence at Cedar Creek Medical endangered patients. She finished her shift in a state of dissociation, clocking out at 12:43 a.m., driving home through empty streets where the traffic lights felt like they were watching her. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white, but her face was calm. The composure was absolute. The trembling wasn't fear, it was restraint, the massive effort of keeping 17 years of military training contained inside a civilian body. By 1:22 a.m., she was in her small rental house on the outskirts of Savannah, a 3-bedroom colonial with peeling paint and a mortgage she'd never fully own. She moved through the kitchen on autopilot, still in her scrubs, still smelling of antiseptic and her own fear sweat, and sat down at the table without turning on the light. The darkness was easier. The darkness was honest. That's when the composure finally cracked. The tears came silently at first, just witness to her own collapse, observing herself from some distance as if she were watching a patient deteriorate. Then they accelerated, moving from her eyes to her hands, to her shoulders, to the gasping sound that came from somewhere deep that had been holding everything together for 3 years. She put her elbows on the kitchen table and let her face fall into her palms, and for 24 minutes she sat in complete silence and simply broke. This was how Riley found her at 6:11 a.m. Her 11-year-old daughter, thin-limbed and still half asleep in her school uniform, had come downstairs for breakfast and stopped in the kitchen doorway. "Mom? Why are you home? Why are you crying?" Hannah's hands went to her face automatically, trying to wipe away evidence of the night, trying to construct an explanation that an 11-year-old could understand. The thing about being a parent was that your children gave you a clock for your own deterioration. They could sense when your composure cracked, could feel when the person you pretended to be wasn't the person actually standing in front of them. "I saved someone's life," Hannah managed, her voice carrying cracks like frost patterns. "And some people didn't like how I did it." Riley sat down across from her, the way children do when adults are finally being honest. "The hospital people." "Yes." "Did they say it was wrong?" Hannah's jaw tightened. "They're saying it was dangerous. They're saying I don't have the right to do what I did, even though it was the only thing that could have saved him." Riley reached across the table and took her mother's hand. Her daughter's fingers were small and still had the softness of childhood, and Hannah held them like she was drowning, like this small warm hand was the only thing tethering her to a world that still made sense. "That's not fair," Riley said. "No," Hannah agreed. "It's not." Over the next 3 days, the hospital's systems moved in parallel. A formal investigation was launched. Union representatives came to her house and used words like retaliation and documentation and your rights under state law. But Hannah knew what was really happening. She could read the trajectory the way you could read a patient's vital signs. What started as social attacks had escalated to strategic maneuvering, and Mercer had activated networks that were far larger than Cedar Creek Medical. The medical board was reviewing her claims of military nursing experience. The hospital's legal team was consulting with insurance carriers. Her shift was frozen pending investigation outcome. Her nursing license, the credential she'd built her civilian identity around, was under state examination. Thursday evening, at 7:32 p.m., someone knocked on her front door. She answered it without checking the peephole and found Marcus Webb standing on her porch, leaning on a cane he shouldn't have needed for another 3 weeks. His fall was gone. His shoulder, the one she'd performed the field thoracotomy on, the procedure that had started all of this, the patient Mercer was using as the reason she was falling apart, was wrapped in new bandages visible through his shirt collar. "I checked myself out AMA, Marcus said without preamble. "I'm not supposed to be walking. My discharge instructions say I need another 2 weeks of observation. But I had to find you." Hannah's hands went steady. This was containment time. This was the moment where you had to choose between self-preservation and honesty, and she chose the first option. "I don't know what you mean." "I don't remember your face," Marcus continued, ignoring the deflection. "But I remember your voice. And I know that tattoo on my arm isn't random. I called some guys from my old unit. Described a special forces nurse with a specific call sign. They got real quiet. Then they told me to stop asking questions and hung up. So now I'm asking you. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. You should go, Hannah said. You need to be in a hospital. You shouldn't be walking on that leg. But Marcus shook his head and pulled out his phone. I made one more call. To a Marine colonel who served as Special Forces liaison in Kandahar 3 years ago. Told him a paratrooper woke up in a hospital and a nurse saved his life using field medicine that shouldn't exist in civilian hands. And he told me something interesting. He told me to bring a message to my hospital board meeting tomorrow. Marcus looked directly at Hannah. Sanctuary, he said. Tell her Sanctuary wasn't forgotten. Hannah's hand moved to her jacket, to the inside pocket where the faded unit patch was sewn, the one piece of physical evidence she'd kept despite orders to destroy everything, despite protocols that said her identity should disappear completely. Her fingers found it and held it there while Marcus Webb stood on her porch, and through the window Riley watched her mother lean against the wall as if gravity had suddenly become unbearable. The hospital board convened on the 3rd day after her firing, in a conference room on the 7th floor where morning light cut through the windows like a surgical blade. Hannah wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Cedar Creek Medical ever again. But Marcus Webb had called her at 6:19 a.m. and said 4 words, "They're going to lie today." Dr. Mercer stood at the head of the mahogany table, his presentation already cued on the screen behind him. Slides about unqualified personnel performing unsupervised procedures. About lowered standards and patient safety risks. His voice had the smooth confidence of a man who'd never once considered he might lose. The hospital CEO, Barbara Simmons, sat to his right. The medical board members arranged themselves like dominoes waiting to fall in his preferred direction. He was explaining why Hannah Clarke represented an institutional liability when the conference room doors opened. Marcus Webb wheeled himself through first, his hospital gown replaced with dress uniform blues, the fabric sharp enough to cut. His eyes locked on Hannah across the room, and for 3 seconds nobody spoke. Then his voice came out like a prayer answered. Sanctuary. Dr. Mercer's presentation faltered. His hand froze on the remote. A Marine colonel in full dress blue stepped through the doors next, medals across his chest like a constellation of violence. Behind him came a 2-star general, the kind of quiet authority that made the room's air pressure change. The colonel moved to the center of the table and opened a folder stamped with classifications Hannah recognized even from across the room, clearances that existed in a different world than hospital bureaucracy. His voice was measured. Formal. Captain Hannah Clarke was deployed to Kandahar Province with Task Force 121 from 2019 to 2022. During Operation Granite Shadow on March 14, 2021, she extracted a wounded Special Forces operative under sustained enemy fire, carrying him approximately 3.2 kilometers through hostile terrain despite active gunfire engagement. Her documentation of field triage, emergency airway management, and blood loss estimation demonstrated the surgical precision of a trauma specialist, not a standard field medic. The colonel paused, and his next words seemed to reshape the entire room. For extraordinary heroism under fire, Captain Clarke was awarded the Silver Star. And for wounds sustained during that operation, she received 2 Purple Hearts. The 2-star general stepped forward and saluted. Not a casual gesture. A full, formal military salute directed at Hannah Clarke, who had been escorted from this hospital by security 3 days ago like a criminal. The general held the tablet displaying her medals, the Silver Star gleaming against the screen, the Purple Hearts distinct and undeniable. Dr. Mercer's face had gone the color of old tile. This is theater. This is completely irrelevant to. You don't get to speak, the general said. His voice wasn't loud. It was the kind of quiet that moved through a room like a shock wave. You're done speaking. The Pentagon liaison arrived last, a woman in a charcoal suit carrying 2 folders. The first contained the official declassification notice, Hannah's records were classified under Operational Security Protocols per 10 U.S.C. Section 130B. The second folder was thicker. Much thicker. "We conducted the forensic audit you requested, Dr. Mercer," the liaison said, and her tone suggested this outcome had delighted no one. "Cross-referencing nursing documentation against your surgical records." She opened the folder, and Hannah could see the tabs. 12 patient cases. 8 cases. 4 cases. Each one annotated with dates and procedure codes. "We found discrepancies. Significant ones." The auditor appeared via video conference, his voice coming through the speaker with clinical precision. "In 18 months, we identified 12 post-operative complications documented by nursing staff that don't appear in Dr. Mercer's operative notes. 8 cases where complications appear in patient charts but not in his surgical reports. 4 cases where timestamps and medication orders were altered retroactively." A pause that felt like gravity. The patient in room 304, retired Marine Thomas Brennan, presented with acute cardiac tamponade on post-operative day 2. In his chart, Dr. Mercer attributed this to post-operative hemorrhage. However, his original surgical notes don't document the pericardial effusion he would have observed during the initial procedure. We compared his intraoperative photographs against the surgical report. The photographs show the effusion. The report doesn't. Dr. Mercer's hands were shaking now. His composure had fractured like old glass. "This is a misinterpretation of standard post-operative variation. Captain Clarke's emergency thoracotomy saved Colonel Brennan's life," the general interrupted. His voice made the fluorescent light seem to flicker. "The same procedure she performed under enemy fire in Kandahar. The difference is, in Kandahar, her commanding officer authorized it because he trusted her judgment. Here, she had to act without authorization because someone was hiding a medical error." Marcus Webb's voice came next, steady as a rifle sight. Dr. Mercer prevented the night nurse from checking vitals. Told her he needed uninterrupted rest. 3 times. If Captain Clarke hadn't overridden that order, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Barbara Simmons turned to face Dr. Mercer, and her expression had transformed into something granite hard. "You launched this investigation to remove her. Instead, you've documented your own negligence. Your medical license is suspended effective immediately pending criminal investigation. Hospital security will escort you from the building." The same security officer who'd walked Hannah out 3 days earlier stepped into the room, and the symmetry of it was almost audible. Dr. Mercer stood, his face flushed with something between rage and panic. As they moved toward him, he turned back to Hannah, his voice raw. "You think you're a hero? You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." Hannah's expression didn't change. Her hands rested on the table, steady as surgical instruments. She said nothing, and somehow that silence was more devastating than any response could have been. The room held its breath as if it was witnessing something that couldn't be taken back. The door closed on his protests. The Pentagon liaison retrieved her folders. The general stood and saluted Hannah directly, not the casual acknowledgement given to civilians, but the full formal salute given between soldiers. This time Hannah stood and returned it, the first public acknowledgement of who she really was. The room went dead silent, everyone understanding they'd just witnessed something that transcended hospital politics. Marcus Webb wheeled closer, tears streaming down his face. 3 years of fragmented memories suddenly reassembled. The field around Kandahar. The pain. The hands moving with absolute precision. The voice saying, "Stay with me, Sergeant. You're going home." And then nothing until now. "I should have remembered you. I should have known." Hannah's stoic mask finally softened, just slightly. "You remembered when it mattered, Sergeant." 6 weeks later, Hannah stood in her new office at the Savannah VA Hospital. The placard on her door read Hannah Clarke, RN, BSN, Emergency Department Director. Through the window, she watched the parking lot where a medical supply van pulled up. Dr. Mercer descended from the driver's seat, his hands now holding a clipboard instead of surgical instruments. He loaded boxes of bandages and bedpans onto a hand truck, medical supplies for facilities across the southeast. Stripped of his license. Facing criminal charges. The prestigious surgeon had become transport staff for the company that supplied the equipment he'd once ordered around. He glanced up at the building, saw her watching from the 7th floor, and quickly looked away. There was no satisfaction in Hannah's expression. Only steady composure. Marcus Webb stood beside her without the cane now, physical therapy having restored most of his mobility. His arm bore her call sign tattooed forever, Sanctuary in capital letters above the coordinates of where she'd found him. "You saved my life twice," he said. "Once in Kandahar. Once by being who you are." Hannah touched the unit patch now framed on her wall, no longer hidden in a jacket lining but displayed openly. Her official discharge papers hung beside it. Her silver star gleamed in the afternoon light. Riley, her daughter, sat in the corner doing homework, finally understanding why her mother moved through the world with the kind of grace that came from having already survived the worst. Barbara Simmons appeared in the doorway. "Your first staff meeting is in 10 minutes. The team is eager to meet you." Several combat veterans specifically requested transfer when they heard Sanctuary was running the ED. Hannah nodded, adjusted her scrubs. She wore them now with a small American flag patch, a compromise the VA had approved without hesitation. As she walked toward the conference room, Marcus called after her. "What do you want people to know about you, Captain?" Hannah paused, looked back, and for the first time in 3 years, allowed herself a small smile. True heroism is what you do when the world stops watching. In the parking lot below, Dr. Mercer loaded the last box, climbed into the van, and drove away. The window above reflected the morning sun, and for a moment, the view was only light. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your value, please subscribe and like this video. Comment below, have you ever judged someone only to find out you were dead wrong? Hannah's story is far from over. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next.